I'm Craig Timm, and this is ACAMS Live. Thank you so much to everyone tuning in today. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. If you have a question, you can feel free to drop it in the comments as well. Today, we are going to talk about fraud and scams, and they are exploding everywhere. It was the #1 threat in the ACAMS 2025 Global Threats Report, and governments around the world are challenged with how to respond. But one of the interesting things is, when you have a crisis like this, it also brings to the forefront some really interesting ideas about how to fight back against the scammers and better protect victims. So here to talk about one of those initiatives today is FBI Deputy Assistant Director Jim Barnacle. Jim has been a leader in the U.S. fight against money laundering for over 2 decades, from his days as a special agent back in New York to leading the FBI's money laundering unit, and then later the financial crime section, and now in his position today, all at headquarters. So, Jim, thank you so much for being here today.
Craig, thanks for having me, and thanks to you and all your associates at ACAMS and the membership as well for joining us. Glad to be here and looking forward to the discussion.
Well, let's start with just a bit of a lay of the land. Can you give us some insights into what the latest trends are that you and the FBI are seeing when it comes to scams against individuals?
Yeah, so we're seeing the three biggest scams in terms of both complaints and losses are investment frauds. Unfortunately, business email compromise. It's been lingering on for over a decade now. It's still right there. And then tech support schemes would be the third. I'll remind everyone, Craig, that the Internet Crime Complaint Center report, or IC3 or ic3.gov, which I'll say many times today, that report should be released to the public in about a week or so.
And just on the IC3, because it's such an important resource that I think for people to know about. In the US, if you are the victim, that's such an important way to have your case known about and let the FBI know about it. We also have a lot of international folks here. Should they be reporting to that? Is it just a US thing? Tell us a little bit about, we're going to get into some other stuff, but IC3 is so important. I want people to know.
Yeah, it's really important. So Internet Crime Complaint Center, as I mentioned, the website is ic3.gov. And it is a repository for complaints. And we do two things with that. One, we action complaints. If it's something that happened recently and we can action, we think there's a potential to recover money, we will do that. We share it. All of the federal law enforcement agencies have access to IC3. I think that's really important. This is not just an FBI tool. Our state and local partners also have access to the information in there. So what victims do is they file a complaint. It's all on the internet. It's pretty easy to file a complaint in there. And then we do two things. One, like I said, we action complaints. But secondly, we use that to build out what the fraud threat picture looks like. What are the trends that we're seeing? What are the different types of frauds that people are being impacted by? And we're looking to use that information to identify new cases, new targets, new subjects. So when we talk about some of the initiatives we do today, we'll talk about how we use some of that IC3 data. So it's really important to build that threat picture and the trend analysis. And yes, victims from around the world can report to ic3.gov, and we encourage reporting. But as you know, we are restricted to working primarily cases in the United States.
That's right. But the nature of these criminal organizations are that they're victimizing people around the world. And so your report from internationally may come back to help you because they're probably US victims too.
100%.
All right, so you mentioned it. I mentioned it in my opening. One of the things that I recently read about that I know isn't exactly recent, but I think is really interesting, is this victim outreach program that the FBI has instituted called Operation Level Up. We know FBI, premier law enforcement agent, putting bad guys behind bars. But this is something, that a lot of people might not think of when they think of the FBI. So I'm wondering, can you tell us a little bit about what Operation Level Up is, who you're reaching, and some of the really fantastic results that you've had with it?
Yeah, this is a great opportunity to share with the public and of what we're doing in this space. So Operation Level Up is a proactive method where we're looking to identify victims. We're reaching out to them. So I should say that. Let's kind of step back. We're looking at victims in cryptocurrency investment frauds, the pig butchering, if you will. So we're looking to identify victims we're reaching out to victims and we're trying to reduce their losses. We're doing it early on. So we're looking at victim wallets. We're looking out there on the internet. We're looking at our IC3 complaints, and we are identifying victims and we're calling them. We're just simply picking up the phone and calling those victims. When we started this in January 2024, it was the FBI and the US Secret Service were the main agencies working the initiative. But I'm happy to report HSI and the FDIC, Office of Inspector General, have since joined. So now we have 4 federal agencies regularly calling victims. 76% of the victims we call, they actually don't know they're a victim of this fraud. So let me give you some of the numbers. In the last year and 3 months, we've called 5,300 victims. We've identified about 6,000 malicious addresses, which could be malicious domains, telephone numbers, social media profiles of the like. We have saved victims, and this is an estimate, of course, about $329 million. So 76%, Craig, 76% of the victims were not aware they were being victimized. And so when we look at where we got them in the stages of the fraud, right, we're trying to get them in the early stages. We can project that what the average loss is for pig butchering, and then we estimate what we've been able to save victims. Where victims are located is important. So all 50 states of the United States have victims that we've contacted, but we've also identified 687 victims that are not in the United States. So they're foreigners. And we have disseminated information to the foreign law enforcement agencies in those countries so that they can make victim notifications. And we know our colleagues overseas are calling victims as well. One of the most important impacts I think I can share with folks is we've referred over 50 victims for suicide intervention. So those are some of the highlights. So we're proactively identifying victims early in the stage. We're using, and I'll talk a little more about it, but we're calling those victims. We're sharing that we believe they're a victim of a fraud. And then I gave you some of the results that we've seen so far.
I mean, it's just the fact that 76% don't know, because you're trying to get them early, but realistically, it's probably been going on for a little while, given, by the time it's reported or it gets to you. So it just it's unbelievable. And then, the fact, look, you're saving money, but you're saving lives too, right? Like that is like the honest facts about this program is like, this is devastating to people financially, but more so emotionally. And like, that's a real thing that you guys are doing for people.
Yeah, that's probably the most rewarding thing we can do in the financial crime space. Obviously, we want to recover money, make victims as whole, or get as much money back in their pockets as possible. But as you know, Craig, it's really difficult and almost impossible to recover money. And in the last year and 3 months in this operation, we've recovered $56 million. So now the estimated losses are well over $5 billion in that time period. So we're just getting a drop in the bucket. But what are the impacts to individuals? And we know so many families have reached out to us and shared that their loved one has decided they couldn't go on. And so when we have the opportunity to talk to a victim and hear the plight and the struggle and the sense of hopelessness some victims have, and our agents have the opportunity to intervene, and then we have this victim services division, these wonderful people in law enforcement that provide victim services to folks, and we introduce victims to victim services, and they come in and they provide support, and sometimes, like I mentioned, it's referral to psychological services or suicide intervention. Sometimes it's referrals to financial institutions and different companies. So helping people is the reason most of us like to work fraud, and this is really rewarding in that respect.
Well, I'm sure you've got, an army of people listening right now who are like, how can I help? And a lot of people are going to be financial institutions. So, from an AML programs, so just wondering, you mentioned IC3, what role do financial institutions play, and or what role could they play to help you if somebody's out there right now saying, all right, what can I do? I'm in, I want to be a part of this.
Yeah, so great question. Two things. IC3 is how we're getting leads to call people. So people are reporting that they're victims. We're not just simply calling those people because they obviously already know that they're victims, but we're doing some stuff on the back end. We're working with financial institutions. We're working with virtual asset service providers. So we're working with banks, virtual asset service providers, money service businesses, and we're reviewing their filings, so BSA filings. We're reaching out to those institutions so that they can inform us of what they're seeing. We're working with FinCEN and their BSA advisory group, the Bank Secrecy Act advisory group, to share the trends and the typologies that we're seeing. And obviously, FinCEN's exchange. But I think where traditional financial institutions can come into play is customers and victims, right? Same thing, are trying to get their money to the bad guy. The adversary has made the pitch. The pitch is in this space. It's cryptocurrency investments, great opportunity. Crypto's done very well. The United States is going to be the crypto capital of the world, which is great, right? It's fantastic for business. It's fantastic for Americans. Great stuff. But with that comes the underbelly of criminals, right? The bad guys will take advantage of anything that's going well. And so that's happening. And so our victims are given a great pitch, great investment opportunity, and their victims are then going to their financial institutions, and they have to get that money out of the financial institution to cryptocurrency, to wire transfer to the foreign recipient account, money service business. You know how that's done. So what we really need the financial institutions to do is know your customer, to talk to your customer. When your customer starts making wire transfers or cryptocurrency transfers, we see in this space, it's a progression from small investments, and then it kind of goes up on a curve like that, right? It's not a flat curve. So victims are enticed to put small dollar amounts in, maybe $1,000, $2,000, little amounts. And they see performance, right? They see, hey, that crypto investment maybe returned 50, 60, 70, 80%. So those are fake returns, but the victim doesn't know that. And so when the victim sees these really good returns, that entices them to put more money in. Well, hell, if I'm getting 8% return this month, I put $1,000 in. Now I see that I have $1,800. So the victim will send more money, maybe $2,000, maybe $5,000, maybe $10,000. That's done 2, 3, 4, 5 times. They continue to see these significant investment returns. In those early stages of the investments, the victims may even withdraw some of the money. Right? And that further entices the victims to put more money in. But then we see that ramp up. So we have a victim. She had invested some money in a fraud, and she was getting a mortgage on her house for $500,000. And she was about to put that $500,000 in before we intervened, educated her, and then she would put it in. We've had other victims that have actually sold their houses, took that equity, the net proceeds, put all that money into these frauds. So what I'm saying is it's that ramp up. So if the banks see customers coming in and start with these small wire transfers, maybe they're going to a legitimate cryptocurrency exchange, a virtual asset service provider, right? The crypto.coms, the companies that we deal with in America, the little wire transfers, but then it starts spiking up, or you see it over and over and over again. That's a red flag. It's an absolute red flag for the banks. So I would look at that, educate your customers, file a SAR. And then obviously the crypto exchanges, they're doing a very good job identifying victims as well. And they reach out to their customers, they educate their customers, and the crypto exchanges are filing SARs as well.
We got a good question from Claudia on the crypto side of it that just came in. Are there any specific coins that are commonly used that if you're on the crypto side looking at what they're moving money into that they should watch out for?
Well, the universal, the larger cryptocurrency coins are where we see the initial investment. So what the bad guy's doing is trying to get you to transfer it to their wallet. So a lot of victims will see several hops. So victim goes to their local financial institution, wires the money to a legitimate crypto exchange. Perhaps they buy Bitcoin or the like. Then we see that transfer of the cryptocurrency from the victim's wallet to the fraudster's wallet. That may be in Bitcoin, it may be in Monero, it could be in anything. But then the money is moved by the fraudster somewhere else. And then what the victim is seeing is basically a fictitious brokerage account. There are fraudulent apps, there are fraudulent online accounts. So victim is logging into what they see as a crypto account or a brokerage account, and they're seeing their investment put into that account. So like I said, it was initially $1,000. They see $1,000. They may see it invested in a legitimate, a Bitcoin, a well-known crypto, or it may just be some investment fund in crypto. Again, the fake performance entices further investment, but that initial transfer, I think it's the ramp up is what you look for.
Okay. But I want to turn back to the victims, because these conversations that you're having, over 5,000 at this point, those are difficult conversations, particularly when, as you said, 76% of people, when you call them, don't know they're being victimized. And this is something that I know that financial institutions deal with on a daily basis, right? They have customers in the same boat. They're trying to do the same thing as you. And now increasingly, I don't know if people out there are finding this, but I'm finding it more and more, family and friends reaching out to me and saying, hey, I think somebody's been a victim of a crime. How do I help them? What do I do? So I'm just wondering, you've had so many of these conversations at this point. I'm sure you've learned some things along the way. What advice do you have for us out there, whether we're at a financial institution or whether we're just dealing with family and friends, based on Operation Level Up, in just terms of how do you get through to these victims?
Yeah, they're hard conversations to have, but they're 100% necessary. There are steps people can take to avoid being a victim, and it's really easy when we sit back and we're not a victim of this fraud, and we weren't on the phone and hearing the pitch, and it's a great pitch, and it's a charming person making the pitch, and you have an account that shows this tremendous performance. Everything kind of lines up to be legitimate, if not for knowing that there's a fraud scheme out there. So you have to have the conversation. You have to use the information that's available, right? You can go on ic3.gov. There's plenty of media articles on these frauds. There's a lot of media coverage on these frauds. So educate yourself, educate the potential victim, show them the white papers that we're putting out and the fraud alerts so I think that's one thing, is just educate the population. Second, if you're looking at making an investment, you've got to do due diligence, just like any other investment opportunity. Do research on the investment. Do research on the people that are proposing this investment. Do research on the company that you're going to be sending your money to. Never send money to anyone you've met online. It's so easy for me to say. And I'm not in the situation. I don't walk in necessarily in the shoes of a victim, and I'm empathetic to the fact that they were in different circumstances and were presented these great opportunities. But that's kind of a cardinal rule, is not to send money to someone you met online. Don't download suspicious applications. Right? There's well-known applications. If you go in the app stores on the various platforms, you see the top 100 applications. So why do you have to download some new investment opportunity app that's 100 millionth on the list of top apps in the financial section? And the bad guys are constantly creating new apps. And so the different companies that have stores are shutting them down, but they're not shutting them down fast enough for victims. So I think those are some of the warnings I would put out there. The other thing I would put out there is we're seeing re-victimization of people, right? So there's a victim, they lost money in these pig butchering scams, and then they're getting contacted either by a law enforcement officer, a government official, a tax office. So those are impersonation schemes. And then the other side of it is there are services that offer to help recover funds for victims. Almost always that's a fraud. And so we see fraud, victims of fraud are then being recontacted, and a company is saying, hey, victim, we're a recovery service. We're going to help you find your money. You just need to pay us a little bit of money and we'll help you. That's a fraud. So we're seeing that a lot on the back end. Like a legitimate recovery service will take a cut of the money they recover. They won't ask for you to pay the money in advance, which
up front.
Yeah, right, in advance fee scheme.
Yes, I mean this is something important, I think, for all the AML folks out there and the fraud folks out there. The re-victimization part that you just mentioned is, as part of your conversations with these victims, even if it's later, even if it's identified, like letting them know, hey, you're now, unfortunately, you've just been victimized, you're devastated, but now you're significantly more likely to be targeted again. And you have to be aware of that. That should be a part of everyone's playbook now to try to stop that second and third attempt at victimization.
Yeah, 100%. And so when we talk about level up, I think this is really important to note for the viewers here. We are not conducting an investigation in level up. We are simply notifying victims that we believe you are a victim of fraud, and here's why. Here's the indicators we've seen. We are just simply educating you. We're educating you. This is a fraud. This is the crypto investment fraud. This is a pig butchering scheme. This is a tech impersonation scheme. We're seeing a lot of work at home schemes as well. It's educational, and that is it. On the other side, we do investigations, but that's not the level up initiative. And I want to distinguish the two, because in level up, we're not going to ask you for your bank account information. We're not going to ask you for your social security or your taxpayer ID. We're not going to ask you for your residential address. We're not going to safeguard or protect your money for you. We're not going to come to your door and ask you to hand over your cash so that we can protect it from fraudsters. We're not going to come to your door and ask you to give us your jewelry or your valuables or gold bars to protect you from fraud. We will never do that in the FBI. If we're going to conduct an interview where we're trying to find out all the different ways you were victimized and how you were contacted, that will be separate from this initiative. All right. So I just kind of emphasizing the impersonation part of it. And so for the folks on here that work at financial institutions, you will be impersonated as well. I am impersonated. My colleagues in law enforcement and government officials are impersonated, but your financial institution will be impersonated. There could be fraudulent domains that are very closely associated or named to a legitimate financial institution. But we're seeing victims called by their so-called financial institution, and that their accounts were compromised, and they just need to take that money out of their account for safekeeping. And the bad guy who is impersonating working for a legitimate bank may give the customer a new bank account number and then have the customer wire money to that new bank account. Like that's really important. So banks, be on the lookout for that. Your good name, your institution's name is being, detrimentally impacted and harmed by this as well.
And this is something you could think about if you're a bank out there addressing proactively, right? Like in your communications, in your emails, with it before fraud ever happens, making clear, hey, if someone from Bank of America, let's say I used to work there, ever contacts you, call this number, verify this number. This is where you need to go, right? Like we're happy if you hang up on us and then call this official number, right? Because there are times when you do proactively reach out to clients, but having that way that your institution can give to your customers up front to verify you could end run a lot of this. And you've got to do that before it happens. Couple questions on the website. I know we're almost at time, Jim, so I'm going to wrap up shortly. But one, people asking where they can get more information. So the website Jim mentioned to report crime is ic3.gov. You can also go to fbi.gov. They've got a lot of information on scams. At ACAMS, we've got a ton on fraud and scams. We've got webinars, we've got toolkits. If you go to acams.org, we have a fraud hub. I wish we could cover all the details of all these, but they're all out there, right? Go to the FBI, go to ACAMS, go to other law enforcement agencies. There's a lot of good stuff. I think the one we've got several, I'll end on this one. We've got several comments in the chat just talking about, you mentioned recovery. You mentioned a lot of this goes overseas, international cooperation. Can you just give us a flavor of what that looks like? Do you cooperate with counterparts overseas? It's difficult, but how do you go about trying to recover some of this money? There's probably 4 or 5 questions in the chat, just wanting to understand more about that.
Yeah, so let me say a couple things. One, I mentioned we identified 6,000 malicious addresses and domains. So we're sharing that with the private sector. We're sharing it with tech companies. We're sharing it with the blockchain analytic companies as well. And the blockchain analytic companies have been our partners in this initiative. So I would give my shout outs to TRM and Chainalysis that are most involved. Second, we have agents operating, FBI agents in over 100 countries across the world. And our colleagues at the Secret Service and HSI have attaches overseas as well. So we are leveraging those existing relationships and partnerships that we have overseas to share information. We're doing it through the FIUs and we're doing it through law enforcement agencies. So I mentioned in the last year on this initiative, we shared 687 foreign victims. We disseminated that to foreign agencies. So we're sharing it that way, but then we're building out what this fraud looks like. So our most important relation, not the most important, but the people we've worked with the longest are the Five Eyes partners and then the Dutch. And so they've been very involved in these initiatives. They've been very involved in the different fraud schemes that are impacting the global citizens. And we've been sharing a lot of information on the trends, the typologies that we see back and forth. And so I think that the partnerships with the financial institutions, the private sectors, the organizations like you, Craig, and ACAMS and the membership of ACAMS is really very important so that we can kind of mitigate these frauds and help the victims.
So one other thing I won't ask you to comment on, but I'll just make people aware. So there is some legislation out there right now around stablecoins in the US. And one of the pieces of that would require even non-US stablecoin issuers who are operating in the US to have the ability to freeze assets pursuant to a law enforcement request. I think that could be game changing in terms of all this stuff. So I think keep an eye on that. I know it's a top priority for this administration to get a stablecoin bill done. This one is now passed out of the Senate Banking Committee with bipartisan support. So I think for those of you interested in all of that, keep an eye on that over the summer, because I think that'll be something to watch. But Jim, unfortunately, look, we've got a ton of questions. I'll jump on the chat later and try to answer some of these. I could keep you here all day, but I won't. You've got important stuff to go do. But I really want to thank you for being here. I really appreciate it. This is such great work, and I hope it's something that yes, it's resource intensive, but there's nothing special about, it's a lot of muscle. It's just a lot of, hey, we're just going to go do it. And other law enforcement agencies, financial institutions, others could go just do this, right? Like, so I hope it leads to some of that. So Jim, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Craig. Thank you, ACAMS, for your partnership and your continued work with the financial institutions.
And thank you for everyone else out there. I really appreciate it. I'm sorry we didn't get to all your questions. I'll work on getting to more of them, but we thank you so much. And we look forward to seeing you next time on ACAMS Live.